The wedding planner's invoice sat on my kitchen counter like a death certificate. $12,000 for flowers that would die in a week. I poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon and opened my laptop, figuring I'd review the catering menu one more time before Elena got home from her law firm. That's when I saw it. Her Google search history was still logged in from when she'd borrowed my computer last week. Most of it was the usual lawyer stuff: case precedents, legal briefs, restaurant reviews. But 3 searches made my blood freeze. How to access spouse inheritance before marriage. Prenuptial agreement loopholes, Massachusetts. Community, property laws, new spouse death. I stared at the screen, my bourbon suddenly tasting like battery acid. Elena Marsh, my fiancée of 8 months, the woman I'd proposed to on a beach in Cabo, was apparently planning my financial funeral before we'd even walked down the aisle. Well, shit, I muttered to my empty kitchen. Guess someone's been doing their homework. The sick thing was, I almost admired the thoroughness. Elena had always been methodical. It's what made her such a killer corporate attorney. But apparently, she'd decided to apply those same skills to bleeding me dry. My phone buzzed. A text from my family lawyer, Harold Klein. Need to see you tomorrow. Spotted Elena leaving Whitman and Associates this afternoon. Thought you should know. Whitman and Associates. My biggest competitor in the construction business, and the firm that had been trying to poach my commercial contracts for 2 years. What the hell was Elena doing there? I closed the laptop and walked to my home office, a converted bedroom that overlooked our perfectly manicured backyard. Elena had insisted on the landscaping, $30,000 for Japanese maples and imported stone. I'd thought it was excessive, but she'd smiled that dazzling smile and said, "Trust me, Michael. It's an investment." Now I wondered what kind of investment she'd really been making. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through our recent conversations, all the usual couple stuff, dinner plans, weekend trips, wedding details. But looking at it now, I noticed something else. Elena never talked about our future together. Not really. It was always about the wedding, the house, the things we'd buy. Never about growing old together or having kids or any of that sentimental garbage. The front door slammed, and I heard Elena's heels clicking across the hardwood floors. "Michael? You home?" "In the office," I called back, minimizing my browser window. She appeared in the doorway, still in her power suit, a sharp black number that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her blonde hair was pulled back in that severe bun she wore to court, and her makeup was flawless despite the 14-hour day. "How was work?" I asked, studying her face. "Brutal. The Morrison case is going to trial next month, and their legal team is being completely unreasonable." She kicked off her heels and rubbed her temples. "I need a drink." "Already ahead of you," I said, gesturing to my bourbon. She wrinkled her nose. "You know I prefer wine." Of course she did. Elena had expensive tastes in everything: wine, clothes, restaurants, men. I'd been flattered when she'd chosen me, a guy who'd built his construction company from nothing after my dad died and left me with more debt than assets. Elena could have had any lawyer or doctor or trust fund baby in the city. Instead, she'd picked the guy with calloused hands and a high school diploma. Now I was starting to understand why. "Elena," I said carefully, "what were you doing at Whitman and Associates today?" She froze, her hand halfway to her temple. For just a second, I saw something flicker across her face. Panic, maybe, or calculation. "Who told you I was there?" "Does it matter?" She straightened her shoulders, slipping back into lawyer mode. "I was consulting on a case. It's not unusual for firms to collaborate when there's no conflict of interest." "And is there a conflict of interest?" "Of course not." But she wouldn't meet my eyes. I nodded slowly, like I believed her. "Good. Because it would be pretty awkward if my fiancé was working with the company that's been trying to steal my clients." "Michael, you're being paranoid." "Am I?" I stood up and walked over to her, close enough to smell her perfume, something French and expensive that I'd bought her for Christmas. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like my future wife has been doing some interesting research lately. The color drained from her face. I don't know what you're talking about. Google search history, Elena. You might want to clear that next time. For a long moment, we stared at each other. I could practically see the wheels turning in her head, trying to figure out how much I knew and how much damage control she'd need to do. Finally, she smiled. That same dazzling smile that had hooked me 8 months ago. Michael, sweetheart, I think you're misunderstanding something. Enlighten me. I was researching for a client, a woman whose husband is trying to hide assets before their divorce. I needed to understand the tactics he might use. It was a good lie, smooth, professional, almost believable. If I hadn't seen those searches with my own eyes, I might have bought it. Which client? I asked. You know I can't discuss that. Attorney-client privilege. Right, of course. She stepped closer, placing her hand on my chest. Michael, I love you. I would never do anything to hurt you. I looked down at her hand, perfectly manicured nails, the engagement ring I'd spent 2 months' salary on, skin soft from expensive lotions. Then I looked at my own hands, scarred and rough from 20 years of construction work. I know, I lied. I'm sorry. Long day, I guess. Relief flooded her features. It's okay. We're both stressed about the wedding. Why don't I open a bottle of wine, and we can go over the final guest list? Sounds perfect. She kissed my cheek and headed for the kitchen. I listened to her heels clicking away, then quietly opened my laptop and deleted her browser history. 2 could play this game. The next morning, I sat in Harold Klein's office, surrounded by law books that probably cost more than my first truck. Harold had been my family's lawyer for 30 years, handling everything from my dad's estate to my business incorporation. He was pushing 70, with white hair and wire-rimmed glasses, but his mind was sharp as a blade. She's planning to take you for everything, Harold said bluntly, sliding a manila folder across his mahogany desk. I had my investigator do some digging after I saw her at Whitman's. I opened the folder. Inside were printouts of financial records, meeting schedules, and photographs. Elena leaving Whitman and Associates. Elena having lunch with James Whitman himself. Elena at a coffee shop with a man I didn't recognize. Tall, dark hair, expensive suit. Who's the guy? I asked. Nicholas Romano. He's a partner at Whitman's, specializes in corporate acquisitions. Word is, he's been asking around about your company's contracts and financial situation. My stomach clenched. How long has this been going on? Best I can tell? About 6 months, right around the time you two got engaged. I stared at the photos, feeling like an idiot. All those late nights Elena claimed to be working. All those business trips and client dinners. She'd been building a case against me, gathering intelligence like I was some kind of enemy target. What's my exposure? I asked. Harold leaned back in his leather chair. Without a prenup? She'd be entitled to half of everything acquired during the marriage. Your house, your business assets, your investment accounts. Even your inheritance from your father's life insurance would be fair game if it's commingled with marital property. And with a prenup? You'd keep what you came into the marriage with, plus any business income that can be clearly separated from marital assets. It's not foolproof, but it's better than nothing. I thought about the life insurance money, $200,000 that I'd use to expand my business and buy the house. Elena knew about it, of course. I'd told her the whole story one night after too much wine about how my dad's death had been the worst and best thing that ever happened to me. Draw up the prenup, I said. Make it ironclad. Harold nodded. I'll have it ready by tomorrow. But Michael, you need to understand. If she's been planning this for 6 months, she's not going to sign willingly. Let me worry about that. I spent the rest of the day at my construction site, a high-end office complex that would net me half a sou. Million in profit if everything went according to plan. But I couldn't focus on concrete pours and electrical inspections. All I could think about was Elena's smile when she'd lied to my face. My site foreman, Tony Ricci, found me standing in the half-finished lobby, staring at nothing. "You look like hell, boss." Thanks for the pep talk. Tony had worked for my dad before me, and he had a talent for reading people. Woman trouble? Something like that. The fancy lawyer? I nodded. Tony spat into the dirt. Never trust a woman who makes more money than you do. That's what my father told me. Your father was married 5 times. Exactly. He learned from experience. Despite everything, I laughed. Any other wisdom from the Ricci family archives? Yeah. When someone screws you over, don't get mad. Get even. That evening, I met my sister Joanna at Murphy's Tavern, a dive bar 3 blocks from my old neighborhood. Jo was 2 years younger than me, but tough as nails. She'd had to be, growing up with an alcoholic mother and a father who worked himself to death. "You look terrible," she said, sliding into the booth across from me. "So I've been told." I filled her in on the Elena situation while she nursed a beer and made increasingly creative suggestions about what I should do to my fiancé's car. "I always knew she was a snake," Jo said when I finished. "Too pretty, too polished. Women like that don't marry guys like us unless they want something." Thanks for the vote of confidence. I'm serious, Michael. You're a good catch. You're successful. You're decent looking. You're not a complete asshole. But Elena could have married a senator or a CEO. Why settle for a construction worker? Because I'm not just a construction worker anymore. No, you're a construction worker with money. Big difference. The bartender, an ex-cop named Marty Sullivan, wandered over with a fresh round. Marty had bought the place after taking early retirement, and it had become a second home for guys like me, blue-collar workers who'd made good but never forgot where they came from. "You two look like you're planning a murder," Marty said. "Just discussing my love life," I replied. "Ah, same thing." Jo leaned forward. "Michael's fiancée is trying to rob him blind." Marty whistled low. "The lawyer?" "Can't say I'm surprised. She came in here once with you, remember? Looked around like she was afraid of catching something." I remembered. Elena had insisted we leave after 10 minutes, claiming she had a headache. Later, she'd made some comment about local color and suggested we stick to wine bars in the future. "So what's the plan?" Jo asked. "Prenup first. Then I figure out how to protect myself." "Screw that," Jo said. "You should be figuring out how to destroy her." "I'm not looking for revenge, Jo. I just want to get out of this with my assets intact." She rolled her eyes. "You're too nice, Michael. That's always been your problem." But as I drove home that night, I found myself thinking about what she'd said. Elena had spent months planning my downfall, treating our relationship like a hostile takeover. Maybe it was time I started thinking like a businessman instead of a lovesick fool. The house was dark when I pulled into the driveway. Elena's car wasn't there. Another late night at the office, no doubt. I sat in my truck for a moment, looking at the place I'd thought would be our home together. Tomorrow, I'd present Elena with the prenup. And then I'd find out exactly what kind of woman I'd been planning to marry. Elena's reaction to the prenup was everything I'd expected and worse. "What the hell is this?" she screamed, waving the 20-page document like it was on fire. We were standing in our kitchen, and her face had gone from pale to red to something approaching purple. "It's a standard prenuptial agreement," I said calmly. "My lawyer recommended it." "Standard?" "Michael, this thing basically says I get nothing if we divorce. It says you get nothing of what I owned before we got married. Anything we build together, we split 50-50. That's not how marriage works." I leaned against the counter, studying her. The mask was completely off now. No more sweet smiles or loving touches. This was Elena in full lawyer mode, and she was terrifying. "How does marriage work, Elena?" because from where I'm standing it looks like you've been treating it as a business transaction from day one." She went very still. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I know about Nicholas Romano. I know about your meetings with Whitman and Associates. I know about your very interesting Google searches." For a moment, I thought she might deny it again. Then something shifted in her expression, and she straightened her shoulders. "So, what if I did some research?" "I'm a lawyer, Michael. Due diligence is what I do. Due diligence on your own fiancée? Due diligence on a major life decision that involves significant financial assets." The casual way she said it hit me like a punch to the gut. She wasn't even pretending to love me anymore. "You know what?" I said. "You're right. Marriage is a business transaction, so let's treat it like one." I pulled out my phone and showed her the screen. A recording app, running for the last 10 minutes. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Protecting my assets." Her eyes narrowed. "That recording won't be admissible in court." "Maybe not. But it'll be very interesting to your partners at the firm. And to your parents. And to everyone at the country club." Elena's parents were old Boston money, the kind of people who cared more about reputation than actual wealth. They'd already been skeptical about their daughter marrying a contractor. If they knew she was planning to fleece me. "You wouldn't dare. Try me." We stared at each other across the kitchen island, two predators sizing each other up. Finally, Elena smiled, but this time it was cold as winter. "Fine," she said. "You want to play games? Let's play games." She signed the prenup with violent strokes of her pen, then threw it back at me. "But don't think this is over, Michael. I'm very good at what I do." "So am I." She grabbed her purse and headed for the door. "I'm staying at a hotel tonight. I need some space to think." "Take all the space you need." After she left, I poured myself a bourbon and called Harold Klein. "She signed it," I told him. "That was easier than I expected." "Too easy. She's planning something." "Probably. But the prenup is solid, and now you've got her on record admitting to the due diligence comment. That'll help if this goes to court." I hung up and wandered through the empty house, trying to figure out my next move. Elena was right about one thing. She was very good at what she did. If I was going to survive this, I needed to be better. The next few days passed in an uneasy truce. Elena moved back into the house but slept in the guest room. We were polite to each other, like roommates who didn't particularly get along, but I could feel her watching me, looking for weaknesses. I started watching her too. I noticed that she took a lot of phone calls in private, stepping out to the garden or going upstairs to her office. I noticed that she'd started working even later than usual, sometimes not coming home until after midnight, and I noticed that she'd become very interested in my business calendar, asking casual questions about my meetings and travel schedule. On Friday night, I was supposed to have dinner with my biggest client, but the meeting got canceled at the last minute. Instead of calling Elena, I decided to surprise her at her office with takeout from her favorite Thai place. The law firm's building was mostly dark, except for a few scattered windows. Elena's office was on the 15th floor, and I could see light spilling out from behind her blinds. But when I got off the elevator, I heard voices coming from the conference room down the hall. Elena's voice, and a man's voice I didn't recognize. I crept closer, staying in the shadows. Through the partially open door, I could see Elena sitting across from a tall man with dark hair, Nicholas Romano, the guy from Harold's photos. "The prenup complicates things," Elena was saying. "But it's not insurmountable." "What about the business assets?" Romano asked. "That's where it gets interesting." His company is incorporated, but most of the major contracts are in his personal name. If something were to happen to those contracts, such as safety violations, code infractions, maybe some problems with permits, the kind of things that could shut down a construction company permanently. My blood went cold. Elena wasn't just planning to take my money, she was planning to destroy my business. "And then what?" Romano asked. Then Michael Brennan goes from millionaire contractor to unemployed has-been. The prenup won't matter much if there's nothing left to protect. Romano laughed. I have to admit, I'm impressed. When you first came to us with this idea, I thought you were being overly ambitious. I don't do anything halfway, Nick. You should know that by now. There was something in her voice, something intimate and familiar. I pressed closer to the door, trying to get a better view. That's when I saw Romano reach across the table and take Elena's hand. Not a business handshake, something much more personal. How long have you two been sleeping together? I asked, stepping into the conference room. Elena spun around, her face going white. Romano started to stand up, but I held up my hand. Don't bother. I'm not here to fight. Michael, Elena began, this isn't what it looks like. Really? Because it looks like my fiancé is planning to destroy my business while screwing my biggest competitor. But hey, maybe I'm misunderstanding the situation. Romano found his voice. Look, Brennan, this is just business. Just business, I repeated. You know what? You're absolutely right. I pulled out my phone and showed them the recording app, still running. Conspiracy to commit fraud, industrial sabotage, breach of fiduciary duty. I'm not a lawyer, but I'm pretty sure that's enough to get you both disbarred. Elena's face went from white to gray. You can't prove anything. I can prove you've been feeding confidential information to my competitor. I can prove you've been planning to sabotage my business, and I can prove you've been lying to me for months. I looked at Romano. How long? What? How long have you two been together? Elena lifted her chin defiantly. Since before we got engaged. The words hit me like a physical blow, but I kept my expression neutral. Well, that explains a lot. I turned to leave, then stopped at the doorway. Oh, and Elena? The wedding's off. I'll have my lawyer send over the paperwork. As I walked back to the elevator, I could hear them arguing behind me. Elena's voice high and panicked, Romano's deep and angry. But I didn't look back. I had work to do. The next morning, I called an emergency meeting with Harold Klein and my accountant, Sarah Chen. We gathered in Harold's office at 8 a.m., armed with coffee and a burning desire to make Elena's life as difficult as possible. First things first, Harold said, spreading papers across his desk. We need to secure your assets. Elena might try to claim the engagement ring was a gift, but since the wedding's been called off, you're entitled to get it back. I don't want the ring, I said. I want to make sure she can't touch anything else. Sarah looked up from her laptop. Your business accounts are safe. They're all in the company name, and the prenup protects them anyway. But the house is more complicated. You bought it after you started dating Elena, and she's been living there for 8 months. She's not on the deed. No, but she might claim common law marriage rights or demand compensation for improvements she paid for. I thought about the $30,000 landscaping project. She didn't pay for anything. I covered all the expenses. Can you prove that? Bank records, credit card statements, canceled checks. I keep everything. Harold smiled grimly. Good. What about the business sabotage angle? That's where it gets interesting, I said, pulling out my phone. I've got Elena and Romano on tape discussing plans to destroy my company through fake safety violations and permit problems. Sarah whistled. That's conspiracy to commit fraud. Maybe racketeering depending on how deep this goes. The question is, what do you want to do with it? Harold asked. I'd been thinking about that all night. Part of me wanted to turn the recording over to the police and watch Elena get arrested. But the smarter play was to use it as leverage. I want them to suffer, I said. But I want to do it legally. Define suffer, Harold said. I want Elena disbarred. I want Romano's company investigated. I want everyone in their social circle to know exactly what kind of people they are. Sarah grinned. I like the way you think. We spent the next 2 hours developing a strategy. Harold would file complaints with the State Bar Association and the District Attorney's Office. Sarah would audit my business records to document any attempts at sabotage, and I would handle the social destruction personally. My first stop was the country club where Elena and I were supposed to have our wedding reception. The event coordinator, Mrs. Whitfield, was a society matron who'd known Elena's family for decades. "Mr. Brennan," she said, ushering me into her office. "I was so sorry to hear about the wedding cancellation. Is there anything we can do to help?" "Actually, there is. I wanted to make sure you heard the real story before the rumors start flying." I gave her an edited version of the truth. Elena had been cheating with a business rival and planning to defraud me. I left out the recording and the sabotage plot, but I made sure she understood that Elena was not the innocent victim she might appear to be. Mrs. Whitfield's eyes grew wider with each detail. By the time I finished, she was practically vibrating with indignation. "That poor dear girl," she said. "I had no idea she was capable of such behavior." "I'm sure you'll be discreet," I said. "Of course. But you know how these things are. Word has a way of getting around. Word indeed." By the time I left the country club, I was confident that Elena's reputation in polite society was about to take a serious hit. My next stop was Murphy's Tavern, where I found Marty Sullivan polishing glasses behind the bar. "You look better," he said when I walked in. "I feel better. Called off the wedding. Smart move. What happened?" I told him the story, and Marty listened with the focused attention of an ex-cop. When I finished, he nodded slowly. "You need help with anything?" "Maybe. Elena and her boyfriend are planning to sabotage my business. If you hear anything, rumors about safety violations, permit problems, anything like that, I'd appreciate a heads up. Consider it done. I still have friends in the department." That evening, I was sitting in my living room enjoying the silence of my Elena-free house when my sister Jo called. "I heard you dumped the Ice Queen," she said without preamble. "News travels fast. Are you okay?" "I'm better than okay. I'm free." "Good. Because I have some information you might find interesting." "Such as?" "Remember Elena's best friend, Valerie Morrison?" I remembered Valerie, a sharp-tongued blonde who worked in marketing and always seemed to be whispering in Elena's ear about something. "What about her?" "She's been asking around about your business. Specifically, she's been trying to find out who your major clients are and when your current contracts expire." "How do you know this?" "Because she tried to pump my friend Lisa for information. Lisa works at the permit office downtown." A chill ran down my spine. "What kind of information?" "Building codes, safety regulations, inspection schedules, the kind of stuff you'd need if you wanted to cause problems for a construction company." So Elena had recruited her friends to help with the sabotage. This was bigger than just a cheating fiancé. It was a full-scale conspiracy. "Jo," I said, "I need you to do me a favor. Name it. Find out everything you can about Valerie Morrison. Where she works, who she's dating, what skeletons she's got in her closet. And be careful. These people are playing for keeps." After I hung up, I poured myself a bourbon and walked out to my backyard. The Japanese maples Elena had insisted on were starting to turn red in the autumn air. Beautiful, expensive, and completely artificial, just like everything else about our relationship. My phone buzzed with a text message. "Elena, we need to talk." I deleted it without responding. 20 minutes later, another text. "Michael, please. I can explain everything." I blocked her number, but I knew this was far from over. Elena wasn't the type to give up easily, and Romano had too much invested in destroying my business to back down now. They'd regroup and come at me from another angle. The difference was, now I was ready for them. 3 days later, Elena showed up at my construction site. I was reviewing blueprints with Tony Ricci when I saw her picking her way across the muddy ground in her designer heels. She looked out of place among the hard hats and heavy machinery, a predator in the wrong habitat. "Boss," Tony muttered, "you want me to handle this?" "No. Let her come." Elena approached with her chin up and her shoulders back, every inch the confident attorney. But I could see the desperation in her eyes. Michael, we need to talk. No, we don't. Please, just 5 minutes. I looked around at my crew, all of whom had stopped working to watch the show. You've got 2 minutes. Make it count. She glanced nervously at the audience. Can we go somewhere private? This is as private as it gets. Elena took a deep breath. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. But what you heard the other night, it wasn't what it sounded like. Really? Because it sounded like you and your boyfriend were planning to destroy my business. Nick isn't my boyfriend. He's a colleague, and we weren't planning anything illegal. Just unethical. It's business, Michael. Sometimes business gets complicated. I stared at her, amazed by her ability to rationalize anything. You know what's not complicated? Honesty, loyalty, basic human decency. Don't lecture me about decency. You recorded private conversations without consent. In my own house, with my own fiancée. Yeah, I'm a real monster. Tony stepped forward. You want me to escort the lady off the property, boss? Elena's face flushed. I'm not finished. Yeah, you are, I said. Security! 2 of my guys appeared. Big men with calloused hands and no patience for entitled lawyers. Elena looked from them to me, and I saw the exact moment she realized she'd lost. This isn't over, she said. It is for me. I watched her navigate the construction site in reverse, her heels sinking into the mud with each step. When she reached her car, she turned back and shouted something I couldn't hear over the machinery noise. Tony grinned. I think she's trying to curse you. Too late. I was cursed the day I met her. That afternoon, Harold Klein called with an update. The Bar Association is taking your complaint seriously, he said. Elena's been suspended pending a full investigation, and the DA's office is interested in the recording you made. What about Romano? Whitman and Associates is conducting an internal review. Word is they're not happy about the potential scandal. Good. There's something else. Sarah found some irregularities in your permit applications. Someone's been filing complaints about your work sites. Anonymous complaints, but they all came from the same IP address. Let me guess. Elena's law firm. Bingo. The complaints were bogus, but they could have caused serious problems if they'd been taken seriously. I felt a surge of anger. Elena hadn't just been planning to sabotage my business. She'd already started. Harold, I want to hit back. Hard. What did you have in mind? I want to sue everyone involved. Elena, Romano, Whitman and Associates, Valerie Morrison. Conspiracy, fraud, defamation, whatever you can make stick. That's going to be expensive and time-consuming. I don't care. I want them to pay. That evening, I was having dinner at Murphy's Tavern when Marty approached my table with a strange expression on his face. You're not going to believe this, he said, sliding into the seat across from me. Try me. Remember how I said I'd keep an ear out for rumors about your business? Yeah. Well, I just got off the phone with my buddy at the police department. Seems someone called in an anonymous tip about safety violations at your construction site. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. When? This afternoon, right after your ex-fiancée paid you a visit. Son of a bitch. It gets better. The caller claimed to have inside information about bribes and code violations. Said you were running an unsafe operation and endangering workers. I set down my fork. Please tell me the cops didn't take it seriously. They have to investigate any safety complaint, but my buddy did some checking, and guess what? Your safety record is spotless. No violations, no complaints, no problems. What happens now? They'll send an inspector out next week just to cover their bases. But since there's nothing to find, you'll be cleared. And the person who made the false report? Marty smiled grimly. Filing a false police report is a crime. If they can trace the call, they'll find Elena. Or one of her friends. I leaned back in my chair, processing this information. Elena was escalating, getting more desperate and more reckless. That made her dangerous, but it also made her vulnerable. Marty, I need another favor. Shoot. I want to set a trap. 2 hours later, I was back at my house making phone calls. First, I called my biggest client and told him I was concerned about potential sabotage attempts on his project. Then I called the local newspaper and gave them a tip about corruption in the construction industry, specifically about competitors using false accusations to damage legitimate businesses. Finally, I called Elena. She answered on the first ring. Michael, we need to meet. I tried to talk to you today, but you wouldn't listen. I'm listening now. Murphy's Tavern tomorrow night at 8. That dive bar? Michael, can't we go somewhere more appropriate? Take it or leave it, she sighed. Fine, but I'm bringing Nick. Bring whoever you want. After I hung up, I called Harold Klein and filled him in on the plan. Are you sure about this? He asked. Elena's getting sloppy. She's angry, and angry people make mistakes. What if she doesn't take the bait? She will. Her ego won't let her stay away. The next evening, I arrived at Murphy's Tavern early and claimed a corner booth with a clear view of the entrance. Marty had agreed to help, and he'd set up a small recording device behind the bar. If Elena or Romano said anything incriminating, we'd have it on tape. At 8:15, Elena walked in with Nicholas Romano and Valerie Morrison. They looked around the dimly lit bar with obvious distaste, then spotted me and approached my table. Michael, Elena said, sliding into the booth across from me. Thank you for agreeing to meet. Romano sat beside her, and Valerie took the chair at the end of the table. They looked like a corporate hit squad in their expensive suits and cold expressions. So, I said, what did you want to talk about? Elena leaned forward. I want to make a deal. I'm listening. You drop the complaints to the Bar Association and the DA's office, and we'll call off our business arrangement with Whitman and Associates. What business arrangement? Romano spoke up. The one where we acquire your company's contracts after you're forced out of business. I stared at him. You just confessed to conspiracy. I confessed to smart business practices. By filing false police reports? Valerie laughed. You can't prove we filed any reports. Actually, I can. The call was traced to your office phone, Valerie. Her smile faltered. That's impossible. Is it? Because the police seem pretty confident about their evidence. Elena's face went pale. Valerie, what did you do? I was trying to help. You said you needed leverage against him. I said we needed information, not criminal charges. I watched them turn on each other with satisfaction. This was exactly what I'd hoped for. Desperation leading to mistakes, mistakes leading to confessions. Here's my counteroffer, I said. Elena, you resign from the bar voluntarily and stay out of my life forever. Romano, you withdraw Whitman and Associates from any projects that compete with mine. And Valerie, you confess to filing false police reports and accept whatever consequences come with that. And if we don't, Romano asked, then I release the recordings I made of your conspiracy meetings. I sue all of you for everything you're worth. And I make sure everyone in this city knows exactly what kind of people you are. Elena's composure finally cracked. You bastard. You self-righteous, small-minded bastard. At least I'm honest about what I am. She stood up abruptly. This isn't over. Yes, it is. But as they filed out of the bar, I knew Elena was right. It wasn't over. Not yet. The final confrontation came 2 weeks later, at the construction site where it had all started. I was working late, reviewing plans for the next phase of construction, when I heard footsteps behind me. Elena stood in the doorway of my trailer office, but she looked different. Haggard, desperate, like a woman with nothing left to lose. Hello, Michael. Elena. I thought we'd said everything we needed to say. Not quite. She stepped into the trailer and closed the door behind her. In the harsh fluorescent light, I could see that she'd been crying. "The Bar Association suspended my license," she said. "Pending a full investigation." I heard. "Romano fired me, said I was a liability." Probably true. "My parents won't return my calls. My friends won't take my meetings. You've destroyed my life." I looked at her. This woman I'd once planned to marry, now reduced to a shell of her former self. "I didn't destroy your life, Elena. You did that all by yourself. By trying to protect my future. By lying to everyone who cared about you. By betraying the people who trusted you. By turning love into a business transaction." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I never meant for it to go this far. But it did. And now, you have to live with the consequences." For a long moment, we stared at each other across the small trailer. Then Elena straightened her shoulders one last time. "I hope you're happy," she said. "I'm not happy. But I'm free." She nodded slowly, then turned and walked out of the trailer. I watched through the window as she crossed the construction site, her heels clicking against the concrete. At the gate, she stopped and looked back. But she didn't say anything. She just got in her car and drove away. I never saw Elena Marsh again. 6 months later, I was sitting in Harold Klein's office, signing the final paperwork to close the case. "All charges against Valerie Morrison have been resolved," Harold said. "She pled guilty to filing false reports and paid a fine. Elena's license suspension became permanent when she failed to respond to the Bar Association's inquiry. And Romano left Whitman and Associates under mysterious circumstances. What about the civil suits? Settled out of court. You'll receive full compensation for damages, plus attorney fees." I signed my name with a flourish. "So it's really over." "It's over." I walked out of Harold's office into a bright spring morning, feeling lighter than I had in months. My business was thriving, my reputation was intact, and my future was my own again. That evening, I had dinner with Joe at a new restaurant downtown, the kind of place Elena would have loved, all white tablecloths and expensive wine. "Any regrets?" Joe asked. I thought about it. Just one. "What's that?" "I wish I'd figured out what she was sooner. Would have saved everyone a lot of trouble." Joe raised her glass. "To learning from experience." "To learning from experience." We clinked glasses, and I smiled. Elena had taught me a valuable lesson about trust, about love, and about the difference between the two. It was an expensive education, but worth every penny. Because now I knew the difference between someone who loved me and someone who loved what I could give them. And I'd never make that mistake again.